I thought this could be an interesting idea for a video. I want to talk about some advanced stats when it comes to edge rushers. Who do advanced stats say is overrated and underrated? And I'm not really that interested in like, oh, advanced stats say this guy is the 6th best edge rusher, but regular stats have him as the 8th best edge rusher. Like, that's okay. You're in the same ballpark. That's not that interesting to me. What I tend to look at more so is what are the big swings. So here's what I did, and we're going to kind of get into this as we go. So first things first next to me, I know it's a little small, but at least this way you can kind of pause and look at it if you want to. We'll get into more individual players in a second. But these are the top 20 players in terms of sacks. Simple enough. Pretty easy stat. And this is the main stat that people use when they talk about edge rushers, even though a lot of people that are fans of advanced stats would argue that it's a bit misleading. And oftentimes you do have players who aren't great players still end up in the top 20 in sacks, but then fall off and never have another top 20 sack season. So what is the reason for that, and what are maybe some better stats we can use? Well, 2 other stats I used are the ones you see on your screen now: Pro Football Focus grade and pass rush win rate. So again, if you're interested in one of your team's favorite players and where they ended up, check that out. Again, a couple that I was surprised by before I get into some individual ones. I'm going to talk about the clear outliers in just a second, but kind of some notable, maybe not outliers, like guys like Khalil Mack and Trey Hendrickson. Maybe are players that we thought would be outliers. No, they're kind of, again, maybe slight outliers. Khalil Mack's 3rd in sacks, but PFF grade is 12th. Pass rush win rate is 10th. So it's not like he's maybe it's a bit of an outlier, but like I don't know. It's nothing crazy by any means. And again, same thing of a couple other players that I just found fascinating. But let's get into some outliers. We'll start off with the negatives. Let's be mean, and then we'll get into some positives. So let's do the negatives. These are the players that maybe have outsacked their what they're good at. And it should be mentioned that all these players, for the most part, finished relatively good in these stats. So, some of them are lower than others, but let's start off with Danielle Hunter is kind of a good example of listen, he's currently 2nd best in terms of sacks. Okay, that's an outlier because he has a 23rd best PFF grade and 29th best pass rush win rate. And I kind of wonder if because, the Vikings love to blitz and love to dial these things up, is that part of why, he's out-sacking his talent right now? And again, some people might say, well, isn't there value in doing that? I would kind of agree. I think as a whole, for most players, if you generate a lot of pressures, even if you didn't generate a lot of sacks in a specific season, over the course of your career, you're more likely to continue to generate sacks than a player who got a bunch of sacks one year but didn't generate a ton of pressures. That's just true, right? But there also is, to some degree, some talent in when you get a pressure, turning it into a sack as well. So it's not exactly like because Danielle Hunter is 23rd and 29th in those 2 advanced stats, he should be in the mid-20s in sacks every single time. But the fact that he's 2nd is probably an outlier. He probably has gotten maybe in a good situation or gotten a little lucky at that point. So, someone like Montez Sweat is another example of that. Good player, but maybe has gotten a bit lucky as well. But still, we're talking about good pass rushers, top 30 level pass rushers for these 2 guys. And Jonathan Greenard, this was surprising as well, because I was kind of okay, is he maybe getting a little lucky here? 12 and a half sacks, that's surprising. Yes, a little lucky. He's probably not a top 10 pass rusher, but advanced stats still like him. They still say he's a good player and maybe isn't a 12 and a half sack guy. Might be an 8 sack guy, which there's still a lot of value, and maybe a 10 sack guy if he can get a little lucky. So Justin Matabuke is the only non-edge rusher on this list, but I still included him there. Kayvon Thibodeau is quite frankly shocking that he is this bad in advanced stats, because last year he was actually really good when it came to advanced stats, but didn't have a ton of sacks. Somehow he has flipped. My guess would be he is the outlier. I wouldn't pay attention to him. That's how I'm viewing this, because I'm going to just assume he's always been good at advanced stats. In college, he was good at advanced stats. Last year, his advanced stats were good. This year, it hasn't been great, but his sack count is up. I'm going to assume that for whatever reason, I would actually still bank on him being a good player, and he's still young and can get better. And the PFF grade isn't awful. The win rate has been a little rough, but maybe there's some reason for that. I wouldn't freak out if I'm a Giants fan, but it is notable. And if I'm a Giants GM, maybe I pay attention to it in future years and maybe don't give him a huge contract if this continues, but I don't think it's going to continue. Also, guys like the Nico Autry, Leonard Floyd, and George Karlaftis all have gotten high sack numbers, but maybe haven't gotten the overall great advanced stats, which kind of makes sense, right? You're going to have some players who do that. It's not a bad thing. It just means that, like, you know, for me personally, how I'm viewing this, you have someone like Rashawn Gary, who had 9 sacks on the year and has, you know, the advanced stats that kind of, you know, check out there, like Bradley Chubb, another guy. Those are the guys that I probably would be more likely to want as opposed to Leonard Floyd, the Nico Autry, and George Karlaftis, despite their similar sack counts. Again, sometimes it happens. Like Trey Hendrickson, perfect example, a guy who had high sack count but didn't have great advanced stats, but then ended up, you know, working out and still being a really good player, and the advanced stats got a lot better. But more often than not, it goes the other way, so I would be wary of it if I'm a GM thinking about signing those guys. But now for the other side, right? Everyone thinks their favorite edge rusher is underrated. Well, here are the ones that you have advanced stats that back this up. These are all the players that finished in the top 10 in either PFF grades or pass rush win rate, but maybe did not finish in the top 20, and then a couple other players who did finish in the top 20, but probably should be a lot higher in terms of sack counts. Starting off with Myles Garrett, who, again, kind of crazy to think about. The guy who is 7th in sacks is still underrated, but, you know, he's 1st in PFF grade and pass rush win rate, so sack count isn't quite as high, but, you know, he's been debatably the best edge rusher in football this season. You know, probably if you're going to give Defensive Player of the Year to an edge rusher, he should probably be the guy. Micah Parsons, 2nd in PFF grade and pass rush win rate, and Bosa, 3rd in PFF grade and pass rush win rate, although for some reason the RD and 3rd didn't get small like it did with the rest. You know, well, didn't happen on all of them, not sure why. My Microsoft Word skills, not elite apparently, but, you know, Parsons and Bosa still have been fantastic, despite the fact that they haven't, you know, been super high in the rankings there. And then for a few players that maybe their sack count is lower, but have been really good, Bryce Huff has great advanced stats, and Aiden Hutchinson has actually amazing advanced stats, despite the 6.5 sack count. I do wonder if, you know, people always view it when it comes to coverage as, well, if you have a good pass rush, that's going to help out the coverage. People never view it the other way around. If you have good coverage, that's going to help out the pass rushers and give you more sacks. And if you have bad coverage, you're going to get less sacks. So, you know, the Lions have had games of bad coverage. That's probably why Hutchinson hasn't been able to get the sack count despite the, you know, elite pass rush win rate and PFF grade. He's been fantastic this year. And a couple guys who, you know, haven't gotten as much playing time, but are still worth noting. Odafe Owe and Andrew Van Ginkel, both very good advanced stats this year, but again, kind of in a smaller sample size, so worth noting as well. So what does this all mean? Listen, every time I make one of these videos, people that don't like advanced stats just get mad at me for even talking about it. I think it's interesting. I think this is worth discussing. I think this is a fascinating situation because, like I said, you can dislike this, but the reality is most of the guys that we went over that are outliers, positive or negative, it's going to check out that they were, you know, if they were advanced stats say that they're overrated, they are in fact overrated. And if advanced stats say they're underrated, they are in fact underrated. It's not going to happen with all of them. And again, if your favorite player is on the list, I'm sure you're going to feel one way or another about it. But it's going to happen with the majority of them. And that's what's, I think, fascinating. But yeah, figured to make an interesting video. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.